Well, happy Mother's Day again. I'm sure that you'll agree that today is no ordinary Mother's Day, presuming there isn't sickness, presuming there aren't sensitivities that need to be taken into account. Families around Australia will be taking shifts to go and see Mum today. And when they do, there will be awkwardness about hugs and handshakes as we try to adhere to social distancing protocol. It's no ordinary Mother's Day, is it? In fact, I can't think of many things that are more polar opposite than mothers and social distancing. Mothers are about the last people to maintain social distancing, aren't they? Particularly from their children. Like mothers are so often the first to reach out. They're the first to offer their shoulder to cry on. So often they're the ones that seek to work hard at breaking down any kind of distance from their children. Uh, I still laugh with a friend of ours who's on her first trip away with her friends. She was in the car, all her friends were in the car, they were all packed up and going to a beach house up north. First holiday without family. And so off they were driving up the freeway, and a car sped up to be next to theirs. And one of her friends turned to her and said, "Isn't that your mum?" And horrified, she looked out the window and saw her mum waving her hairdryer like a crazy woman, because, of course, that's what she'd left at home. And that's what many mums do, isn't it? On her first trip away, she was utterly embarrassed, but her hair was looking good. Most mums do that kind of thing. Even if you want a bit of social distance from your mum, they'll rarely allow it. Social distancing and Mother's Day. This is no ordinary Mother's Day, is it? As our passage for today, I've chosen quite a bizarre interaction between Jesus and his mother. Just like we're experiencing no ordinary Mother's Day, we see in this passage a picture of a man who is no ordinary son and a mother who recognizes that. Let's have a look at it in John chapter 2, verse 1. Feel free to pause this as you go and find your Bible and find the passage. It's John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." There's so much going on here that's just not ordinary. However, the only thing that is ordinary is a mum wanting to solve a problem, wanting to fix a problem. That's what mums do, right? Finishing a project, finishing finding a lost item, remembering the hairdryer, solving problems big and small. That's what mums so often do, isn't it? So we're in Cana, which isn't far from where Jesus grew up, and Mary takes responsibility for a big problem in the village. The problem being that there's no more wine at a wedding. Now, I imagine you've been to a wedding or reception where there's no wine. It's no great problem for us. But we've actually got to understand the culture in order to understand the problem. See, this wedding in Cana was in all likelihood going to last for 2 or 3 days. In a village like this would be the wedding that had been the subject of discussion for many months and the highlight of the social calendar. And wine was critical to this event. See, for the Old Testament people of God, wine symbolizes joy. So to have a wedding without wine is like having a wedding without joy. Socially, it just doesn't compute. It would be like in Australia having a winter without football, or having an Easter an Easter without an Easter show, or perhaps even for an Anzac Day, having an Anzac Day without a parade. Hold on a minute. In this period of time, we understand better what's going on. We understand better what it means to go without. So for these people in Cana, Going without wine at a wedding was like going without joy at a wedding. It means that there's something seriously has gone wrong here. This is a big cultural problem in Cana of Galilee. That's the problem that this mother wanted to solve. As I say, Mary was the most ordinary part of this story. She wanted to solve a problem and she had an idea of how she might solve it. Just quietly, it's not unusual for mums to think that their children are the solution to the world's problems. But actually in this, Mary was actually right. See, Mary had been keeping notes on Jesus even before he was born. Mary and Joseph heard from angels and from shepherds, from wise men from the east about their son. Mary heard from righteous prophets and prophetesses in the temple about her son who was going to become great. See, Mary knew that Jesus was no ordinary son. She knew that there was no problem that her son, Jesus, could not solve. Jesus' response to a request in verse 4 seems both ordinary and extraordinary. In one sense, it's an ordinary interaction between a mother and a son. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied. See, we don't expect Jesus to respond in that way, or do we? When I hear Jesus saying that, he could be just saying what so many of us have said. Oh, Mum, he calls her woman, right? In Australia, if any son starts a sentence with by calling his mother woman, it's unlikely to end well, right? But again, we're dealing with a different culture here. The NIV footnote down there points out that woman is not to be read in that way. There's no disrespect in Jesus speaking to Mary in that way. But you see, this is no ordinary son by the rest of his response. You see, at the end, verse 4 there, woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied. This is the bit. My hour has not yet come. See, right through this book of John, Jesus has got his eyes fixed firmly on what he calls the hour. The hour is the time when Jesus will be betrayed, arrested, betrayed, and strung up on the Easter cross. He knew that it wasn't his time yet. He knew that in chapter 7, verse 30, and chapter 8, verse 20, when people were trying to capture him. He knew that it wasn't his hour. He knew he would be eventually captured, but just not yet. See, Jesus recognized that it was not yet his hour. But then you fast forward to chapter 17, and he prays that amazing prayer before being arrested. His prayer starts like this. John chapter 17, verse 1. After Jesus said this, he looked towards heaven and prayed, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. See, in the end, you actually see that Jesus' mother is right. She had no ordinary son. Her son could solve any problem. And in fact, he did go on to solve the greatest problem in the world. See, think about it from this way. If the world needed information, God could have sent an educator. If the world most needed, the greatest problem that needed to be solved in the world was technology, God would have sent a nerd, right? If the world most needed money, that was the greatest problem, God would have sent a finance whiz. But since the world's greatest need, the greatest problem was a lack of relationship with Him that could only be sorted out by forgiveness of sins, God sent a sacrifice. And that's how Jesus solves the greatest problem of the world. One way or the other, we all end up putting ourselves at the center of life. As we do that, we're actually trespassing on God's property. See, God deserves to be the center of life, not us. And that displays itself in any number of ways, in the way that we act, in the way that we speak. But see, recognizing that we could not get ourselves out of that situation, God sent Jesus. And Jesus knew what had to be done. He knew he was heading towards that hour when he would be the sacrifice, that moment when he would make things right between us and God, solving the greatest problem in this world. See, Jesus knew that. He knew that he would solve the world's greatest problem by dying. And you know who else knew that? Mary was right. She had no ordinary son. She had a son who could solve no ordinary problem. And she applies it in this wedding. So, of course, he could solve this little problem of wine at a wedding in Galilee. Now, despite Jesus' concern about the hour, the son doesn't disappoint his mother, and his mother goes about ordering the servants of the wedding feast. Now, he is no ordinary son. He goes on to create no ordinary wine. But before seeing that, I just want you to notice as we go through, I want to pause for the sake of my friends who grew up with a reverence for Mary, perhaps even accidentally praying to Mary. I think it's worth noticing that this is Mary's only command in the whole of the Bible. You see right here. What is Mary's only command in the whole of the Bible? Pointing to her son Jesus, she says in verse 5. This is Mary's only command of the Bible. Do whatever he tells you. And the servants do. The servants following instructions, filling 100-litre vats of water, such that the resultant change is extraordinary, pointing to this man who could solve even greater problems than this. Scientists would record what happens here as H2O becoming C2H6O, vats of water becoming vats of wine. And this process is verified by an independent auditor, the wedding MC, who's got to keep things on schedule. He has a taste of this wine, not knowing the process. He chastises the groom for bringing out the Penfolds Grange when it was time for the spumante. Verse 9, you see that there. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. If you know Jesus, you're probably not particularly surprised by this. John chapter 1 reminds us that the world was created through Jesus. So of course Jesus could create some decent wine. At the same time, this is an extraordinary thing to do. As this happened before your eyes, it would just seem remarkable, wouldn't it, if you were one of those servants? See, we remember the problem that Mary was trying to solve here. No wine at a wedding meant no joy. No joy at a wedding that was the highlight of the village social calendar would speak volumes for this marriage that was taking place. See, this miracle isn't just about the quality of wine. It's also about the quantity. You see that. The wedding planners recommend 250 mils of wine per guest at a wedding, 8 guests at a table, 2 litres per table, 20 tables, 40 litres. Is my maths right so far? See, even at a massive wedding of 50 tables, that's 100 litres. That's only one of these 6 ceremonial jars full of this quality wine that Jesus has created. Jesus filled 6 of these vats, 600 litres of Penfolds Grange. Can you imagine that? In solving this problem, Jesus provided an abundance of quality wine. Like when he was feeding the multitudes, there was always food left over. See, Mary had no ordinary son. But of course she knew that, didn't she? And everyone in Cana knew that now too. In fact, look at the response it prompts in the disciples. You see that in verse 11. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. See, this is the first of 7 signs in the book of John. Each one of them undeniably miraculous. Each one of them pointing to the fact that Jesus was the creator, that Jesus was God, for no one else could pull this off. 7 signs. What was the response of the disciples to this? The first of the signs? Well, they believed him, that they trusted him, they depended on him. What are the signs for? I mean, I suspect you have seen more signs in the last 4 weeks than you've seen in a lifetime, right? Signs about hand washing, signs about social distancing, signs about how to queue up in shops. We see signs everywhere, right? Why? Well, we see signs because there is something that is unseen and too important not to miss. You know, the signs about hand washing, distancing in shops are because there is something that is just too important to ignore. The signs are alerting us to something that is big that is going on around us, something that we need to stop and take notice of. It's the same here. What are Jesus' signs alerting us to on this Mother's Day? Later in the Gospel, at the conclusion of the Gospel, Jesus, in John 20, verse 30, it says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. Verse 31, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's what the signs are alerting us to. The signs in the shops alert us to a deadly virus, and Jesus' signs alert us to life that can be found in Jesus Christ. As we believe, trust, rely on him like the disciples did. See, Jesus was no ordinary son, and this is no ordinary Mother's Day. Perhaps in this most extraordinary of times, in this most uncertain of times, this is the time that we need to trust Jesus and take up his offer of life. Perhaps you want to celebrate this Mother's Day by becoming one who reads the signs and believes in Jesus, securing forgiveness from God and securing the offer of life that Jesus extends. Today, I'm going to give you a chance to do that, to pray a prayer to that effect in just a moment. Before we do that, I just want to read the prayer out to you to give you an opportunity to hear what it is that we'd be praying. So we'll pray this prayer. Let me read it for you now. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for Jesus. Today I want to recognize this sacrifice for me. Sorry for the way that I've ignored you and put myself at the center of life. Thank you that you showed your love by offering me forgiveness in Jesus. Please help me to live in a way that would please you. So that's the prayer. I'm going to pray now. I'm going to pray this slowly, and you might like to repeat it in the quietness of your mind as I pray it. Let's pray together. Dear God, thank you for Jesus. Today I want to recognize his sacrifice for me. Sorry for the way that I've ignored you and put myself at the center of life. Thank you for showing your love by offering me forgiveness through Jesus. Please help me to live in a way that would please you. Amen. Friends, if you've prayed that prayer, we're really keen to know that and to help you on this path of following Jesus. Could you please indicate that on the Connect card? And you'll find a link to the Connect card in the comments section on YouTube. Or perhaps if you're a step back from that, you think, you know what, I really want to investigate making a decision about Jesus. I'm not there yet, but I really want to think through this more. We regularly run courses online for people to investigate this some more. Right now, you can note that on YouTube. So I want to be part of one of these courses, and we'll get in contact and fix that up for you. But today is no ordinary Mother's Day. as Jesus is no ordinary son. And so with that in mind, right now we're going to sing.